Commander Kale stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with a sinking heart. Red dots filled the screen, each one representing a Nexari warship that had just destroyed another Alliance vessel. The Crimson Fleet moved, like a swarm of angry hornets, their sleek ships dancing between explosions, while Alliance forces fell apart around them. "Sir, we've lost the Third Fleet," his tactical officer reported, her voice shaking. The young Valerian's blue skin had turned, pale with fear. "Admiral Zoran's ship, it's gone, sir. Direct hit to the reactor core." Kyle closed his eyes for a moment. Zoran had been his friend for 30 years. They'd served together during the Outer Rim conflicts, shared drinks in countless cantinas across the galaxy. Now he was just another casualty in this impossible war. The Nexari had appeared 3 months ago from beyond the Galactic Rim. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They simply arrived and began destroying everything in their path. Their technology was beyond anything the Alliance had ever seen. Energy weapons that could punch through the strongest shields, ships that moved faster than physics should allow, and tactics that seemed to predict every move the Alliance made. "How many systems have we lost now?" Kyle asked, though he dreaded the answer. 17, sir. The Nexari took the Kepler colonies yesterday. Reports say they didn't even slow down, just swept through the defensive grid like it wasn't there. Kyle watched another Alliance cruiser explode on his screen. The Starfire had been one of their newest ships, equipped with the latest plasma cannons and quantum shields. It lasted exactly 43 seconds against 3 Nexari fighters. The enemy ships were smaller, faster and deadlier than anything in the Alliance arsenal. "Communications. Open a channel to all surviving fleet commanders," Kyle ordered. The holographic displays flickered to life, showing the faces of his remaining officers. Some were human, others were the reptilian Draknari. A few belonged to the insectoid Valerian species. All looked defeated. "Status report," Kyle said simply. Commander Vex of the 4th Fleet spoke first. "We've got maybe 200 ships left across all fleets. The Nexari have over 3,000 active warships that we can count." "Our supply lines are cut," added Captain Zara from the defense station orbiting Centauri Prime. "No ammunition, no replacement parts, no reinforcements." The numbers were brutal. The Alliance had started this war with over 1,500 capital ships and thousands of smaller vessels. Now they were down to scattered remnants, running low on everything from fuel to hope. "Sir," his communication officer interrupted, "we're receiving distress calls from the inner colonies. The Nexari have broken through the Sigma defensive line. They're heading straight for the core worlds." Kyle felt the weight of billions of lives on his shoulders. Earth, New Terra, the Centauri colonies, dozens of worlds filled with families who trusted the Alliance to protect them. In 72 hours, maybe less, the Nexari would reach them. "Send out an emergency broadcast," he decided. "All member worlds, all independent systems, anyone who can hear us. We need every ship, every weapon, every person willing to fight." The communication officer's fingers danced across her console. "Message sent, sir. Broadcasting on all frequencies." Meanwhile, on the outer edge of Alliance space, Lieutenant Hyun was running diagnostics on the exploration ship New Sol when the emergency beacon reached them. The message crackled through their old communication system, filled with static but clear enough to understand. "This is Alliance command to all ships. Emergency assistance required. Nexari forces approaching core worlds. All available vessels. Report to Kepler station immediately. This is not a drill." Hyun rushed to the bridge where Captain Lee Min was already studying star charts. Min was young for a ship captain, maybe 35, with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of dangerous exploration missions. "You heard the message?" Min asked without looking up. "Yes, sir. Sounds like the Alliance is in real trouble." Min nodded grimly. "Get me a crew count. How many people do we have aboard?" 60 total, sir. 40 soldiers, 20 engineers and support staff. It wasn't much. The New Sol was designed for exploration, not warfare. Their weapons were basic defensive systems. Their armor was minimal, and their crew was trained for scientific missions, not military combat. But they were the only human ship in this sector. "Sir," came a voice from behind them. Private Kim So approached carrying a datapad. I've been monitoring Alliance communications. It sounds like they've lost most of their fleet. Min studied the tactical reports flowing across his screen. The numbers were staggering. Entire star systems wiped out in days. Fleets that had protected the galaxy for centuries reduced to scattered survivors. What about reinforcements from Earth? Hyun asked. Months away, Min replied. Earth Command is mobilizing everything they have, but our fastest ships would take 4 months to reach Alliance space. The three of them stood in silence, contemplating the situation. Somewhere out there, an unstoppable enemy was crushing everything in its path. The greatest military alliance in galactic history was falling apart, and they were being asked to help with a single exploration ship and 60 crew members. We could run, Kim So said quietly. Head back to Earth space, wait for the main fleet. Min shook his head. By then there might not be anything left to save. He walked to the ship's main communication system and opened a channel to the entire crew. Attention all hands, this is the captain. I'm sure you've all heard the emergency. Broadcast by now. The Stellar Alliance is facing complete destruction from an enemy force called the Nexari. They're asking for any ship that can help. His voice echoed through the corridors of the New Sol. In the engine room, in the crew quarters, in the small armory where their basic weapons were stored, 60 people listened to their captain's words. I won't lie to you, Min continued. This is probably a suicide mission. We're one small ship against an enemy that's destroyed entire fleets. But those people out there, they're counting on anyone brave enough to stand with them. He paused, looking at Hyun and Kim So. Both nodded their support. We're going to help them. Anyone who wants to transfer to the escape pods can do so now. I'll drop you off at the nearest neutral station. No questions asked, no judgment. The ship was quiet for a long moment. Then the intercom crackled to life. This is Sergeant Park from the Marines, sir. My boys and I didn't come out here to run from a fight. Engineering crew reporting, Captain, came another voice. Our engines might be old, but they'll get us there. One by one, every section of the ship reported in. Not a single person asked to be transferred to safety. Min smiled grimly. All right then, set course for Kepler Station, maximum speed. The New Sol turned away from the safety of human space and jumped toward the dying light of the Alliance's final stand. The docking bay of Kepler Station buzzed with desperate activity as the New Sol slowly maneuvered into position. Alliance engineers worked frantically to repair damaged ships, while medical teams carried wounded soldiers on stretchers. The air smelled of burning metal and fear. Admiral Vextar stood waiting on the platform, his massive Draknari frame towering over the human delegation. The lizard-like alien's scales were a deep green color, and his yellow eyes held barely concealed irritation. Behind him stood several other Alliance officers, all looking exhausted and defeated. When the airlock finally opened, Captain Min stepped out first, followed by Lieutenant Hyun and Sergeant Park J. The contrast was immediately obvious. Where? The Alliance officers wore sleek uniforms made from advanced materials. The humans wore simple grey combat fatigues that looked like they'd been patched and repatched dozens of times. Earth forces reporting for duty, sir, Min said, offering a crisp salute to the Admiral. Vextar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his species. The sound was harsh and mocking. 60 soldiers? Just 60? He gestured toward the tactical display showing thousands of red dots approaching their position. The Nexari deploy 10,000 warriors per assault wave, Captain. What exactly do you think 60 humans can accomplish? Behind the Admiral, other Alliance officers whispered among themselves. Some pointed at the human ship visible through the docking bay windows. The New Sol looked like it had been built in someone's garage. Hull plates were welded over obvious battle damage, creating an ugly patchwork of different metals. The weapon mounts had clearly been added later, bolted onto the ship's frame without any regard for aesthetics. Most embarrassing of all, the engines were producing small puffs of black smoke. Our ship might not look like much, Lieutenant Hyun said, stepping forward with calm dignity. But we're here to help however we can. A Valyrian officer near the back actually laughed out loud. Help? Captain, no offense, but your vessel appears to be held together with prayer and welding tape. Our maintenance teams have ships more advanced than yours. Min kept his expression neutral, but Park Jae could see his jaw tighten slightly. The humans had known they would face this kind of reception. Earth's technology was decades behind the Alliance standard. Their weapons were basically upgraded versions of firearms that had been used in Earth's ancient wars, while Alliance forces carried energy weapons that could cut through solid steel. Commander Kyle approached the group, looking more diplomatic than his colleagues. "Captain Min, we appreciate Earth's willingness to send assistance. However, I'm sure you understand our concerns about integrating primitive technology into our defense strategy." "Primitive?" Park Jae couldn't help himself. "Sir, with respect, how's that advanced technology working out for you?" The docking bay went quiet. Several Alliance officers bristled at the sergeant's boldness, but Kyle held up a hand to prevent any harsh responses. He actually smiled slightly. "Sergeant Park makes a fair point," Kyle admitted. "Our advanced technology hasn't exactly proven superior to Nexari capabilities." The tactical display in the center of the bay showed the grim reality. Nexari forces were massing just outside the system, preparing for what everyone knew would be the final assault. Intelligence reports estimated over 50,000 enemy troops, supported by hundreds of warships. The Alliance had maybe 3,000 defenders left across all their remaining vessels. "Where do you want us?" Min asked simply. Vextar studied the strategic map for a moment. "Sector 7, he decided, pointing to a small mining platform on the edge of the defensive grid. "It's relatively isolated, so your limited capabilities won't interfere with our main battle plan." Hyun examined the tactical data. Sector 7 was basically a large asteroid that had been converted into a mining operation decades ago. It had minimal defensive capabilities and no strategic value. More importantly, it would be one of the first positions overrun when the Nexari attacked. "That's a death sentence," one of the human Marines muttered. "Sergeant Park, gather the squad." "Leaders," Min ordered. "We need to review our equipment and develop a defensive plan." As the humans walked away to prepare, the Alliance officers continued their discussion. "Honestly, what did Earth Command expect us to do with 60 soldiers and a cargo hauler pretending to be a warship?" Vextar complained. "Maybe they thought quantity would matter more than quality," suggested a Centauri captain. "Quantity? It's 60 people. The Nexari will roll over them in minutes." Meanwhile, in the New Soul's small armory, Park Jae was conducting inventory with his squad leaders. The weapons looked ancient compared to Alliance standard issue gear. Instead of energy rifles that fired superheated plasma, the humans carried kinetic weapons that used chemical propellants to fire metal projectiles. Their explosives were basic chemical compounds rather than quantum charges. Their armor was made from ceramic plates and fabric instead of energy-absorbing smart materials. "How much ammunition do we have total?" Min asked. "About 2,000 rounds for the rifles, maybe 500 for the heavy weapons," reported Corporal Kim Bo, "plus 40 chemical grenades and those mining charges we picked up on Titan." "Mining charges?" Hyun raised an eyebrow. "Industrial." "Explosives," Park explained. "We figured they might come in handy for demolition work." Min nodded thoughtfully. "What about the platform itself? Any defensive systems we can use?" Private Lee Sun pulled up the schematics on a portable tablet. "Basic mining lasers, some heavy lifting equipment, and a lot of tunnels. The whole asteroid is honeycombed with mining shafts and processing chambers. Environmental systems, artificial gravity, atmosphere recycling, emergency life support. Standard mining colony setup." Min studied the layout carefully. Sector 7 wasn't much to work with, but it wasn't completely hopeless either. The mining tunnels could provide cover and concealment. The industrial equipment might be modified into defensive positions. Most importantly, the isolated location meant they wouldn't have to coordinate with Alliance forces who clearly didn't want them there. "All right, listen up," Min addressed his assembled troops. "The Alliance thinks we're primitives with obsolete equipment. They've given us a position they expect us to lose immediately, but we have advantages they don't understand." Park Jae looked skeptical. "What advantages, sir? Our rifles against their energy weapons? Our chemical explosives against their quantum charges?" "Adaptability," Min replied. "The Alliance has been fighting this war using the same tactics for months, and they've been losing every battle. The Nexari know exactly what to expect from advanced military doctrine. They've studied Alliance weapons, Alliance strategies, Alliance weaknesses. He pointed at the mining platform schematics. But they've never fought humans before. They don't know how we think, how we adapt, how we improvise. Our equipment might be primitive, but it's also unpredictable. Hyun was beginning to understand. They won't know how to counter weapons and tactics they've never encountered. Exactly. The Nexari have built their entire war machine around defeating advanced civilizations. They might not be prepared for something more basic. Park Jae grinned suddenly. You mean we fight dirty? I mean we fight smart, Min corrected. We use every advantage we can find, no matter how unconventional. The mining equipment, the tunnel system, even the asteroid's low gravity, everything becomes a weapon. As the human forces prepared to defend their isolated position, long-range sensors detected the Nexari fleet beginning its final approach. The enemy moved in perfect formation, their crimson ships advancing like an unstoppable tide of destruction. On the Alliance flagship, Vextar watched the tactical display with growing dread. Signal all defensive positions. The attack begins at dawn. In Sector 7, 60 human soldiers checked their ancient weapons one final time and prepared to face an enemy that had never been defeated. Remember, Min told his troops over the communication system, we might not have their technology, but we have something they don't understand. We have each other, and we never give up. The Nexari attack commenced at dawn, and the galaxy was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met immovable human stubbornness. War Master Thexisol stood in the command center of his flagship, watching the tactical display with growing confidence. The crimson dots representing his assault fleet moved in perfect formation toward their targets. Sector 7 showed up as a small blip on the outer edge of the defensive grid, barely worth his attention. Deploy Assault Group 7 to the mining platform, he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. Standard pacification protocol. Should take no more than 10 minutes. The Nexari had perfected their attack strategy over decades of conquest. First, their energy weapons would disable all defensive systems. Then dropships would deploy shock troops to eliminate any remaining resistance. Finally, engineering teams would secure valuable resources and technology. It had worked on hundreds of worlds across 17 star systems. Thexizol's tactical officer, a younger Nexari with bright silver armor, nodded respectfully. War Master, intelligence reports indicate only 60 defenders on the platform. Primitive weapons signatures detected. 60? Thexizol's mandibles clicked in amusement. Deploy only 3 dropships then. No need to waste resources on such minimal resistance. The first wave of Nexari fighters swept towards Sector 7, their sleek ships cutting through space like knives. Their energy cannons charged up, ready to deliver the devastating opening barrage that had destroyed so many Alliance positions. But when they arrived at the mining platform, something was wrong. The expected defensive positions weren't visible. No energy shields powered up to protect critical systems. No Alliance fighters rose to meet them. The asteroid looked abandoned. Command, this is Strike Leader Vorth. Target appears deserted. No defensive response detected. Thexisol frowned. Intelligence had confirmed human presence on the platform just hours ago. Proceed with standard bombardment. Destroy all surface installations. The Nexari fighters opened fire, their particle beams slicing through mining equipment and storage facilities. Explosions bloomed across the asteroid's surface as fuel depots and processing plants went up in flames. For 3 minutes, they poured devastating firepower into every structure they could identify. Surface bombardment complete, War Master. No return fire detected. Deploying dropships now. 3 Nexari transport vessels approached the smoking ruins of the mining platform. Their hulls were scarred from dozens of previous battles, and their troops had never failed to secure an objective. As they descended toward the largest landing pad, their sensors showed no signs of remaining resistance. The first dropship touched down near what had been the main administrative complex. 40 Nexari shock troops disembarked, their energy rifles at ready position. They moved in perfect formation, following assault protocols that had been refined through countless victories. That's when the mining platform exploded. Not all at once. That would have been too simple. Instead, a series of massive detonations rippled across the asteroid's surface, each one carefully timed to catch the maximum number of Nexari forces. Mining charges that had been placed throughout the tunnel system turned the entire platform into a giant fragmentation bomb. The first dropship simply vanished in a ball of fire and debris. The second managed to lift off, but was caught by falling chunks of asteroid and crashed back to the surface. The third ship's pilot tried to escape, but found his engines clogged with metal fragments and smoke. "What just happened?" Thexisol demanded, staring at his tactical display in disbelief. Where 3 dropships had been moments before, now there were only debris fields and radiation signatures. "Unknown, War Master," his tactical officer replied, his voice shaking. "The platform appears to have self-destructed, but our sensors show human life signs still active throughout the structure." "That's impossible. How can they be alive after that explosion?" The answer came from deep within the asteroid's mining tunnels, where Captain Min and his team had taken shelter in reinforced emergency bunkers. They'd spent hours rigging the entire surface with explosive traps while leaving the underground areas intact. "Phase 1 complete," Min reported over the radio. "Surface cleared of enemy forces." Private Kimso was already moving through maintenance shafts that connected to the downed Nexari ships. The tunnels were barely wide enough for a human to crawl through, but far too small for the massive Nexari warriors. She carried a backpack full of improvised explosives, simple chemical compounds that looked exactly like standard human military rations. The Nexari had advanced sensors that could detect quantum explosives, plasma charges, and every other type of sophisticated weapon the Alliance used. But they'd never encountered crude chemical bombs that registered as food supplies on their scanners. Kim so reached the damaged dropship and began placing her rations throughout the vessel's critical systems. The Nexari survivors inside had no idea that death was being delivered by something their computers identified as harmless nutrition packets. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Hyun led a squad through the lower mining levels, studying pieces of Nexari equipment that had been scattered by the explosions. Where Alliance scientists had spent months trying to understand Nexari technology, the humans took a more direct approach. "Their energy shields are designed to stop plasma and particle beams," Hyun reported, examining a damaged Nexari rifle. "But they don't seem configured for kinetic impacts." She picked up a chunk of metal debris and threw it at a piece of Nexari armor. The advanced materials that could deflect energy weapons were pierced by simple metal moving at high speed. "Sergeant." "Park, are you getting this?" Park Jae's voice crackled back over the radio from deeper in the tunnel system. "Copy that, Lieutenant. We're setting up in Cargo Bay 3. These guys really don't like surprises." Park had turned the large storage chamber into what military historians would later call a masterpiece of improvised warfare. Mining explosives were buried under metal debris and loose ore. Heavy lifting equipment had been repositioned to create narrow corridors that would funnel attackers into kill zones. Most importantly, he'd flooded the entire area with a mixture of industrial gases that would interfere with Nexari sensors. When the next wave of Nexari troops finally made it into the asteroid's interior, they found themselves in a nightmare of confusion and chaos. Their advanced tactical systems had been designed to fight organized military forces, not desperate humans who treated every piece of mining equipment as a potential weapon. The Nexari moved in standard formation, expecting to encounter defensive positions and organized resistance. Instead, they found themselves stepping on buried explosives, walking into tripwires connected to industrial machinery, and breathing gases that made their sensors malfunction. "This is impossible," Thexisol repeated, watching his casualty reports climb. "They're fighting from positions that should be uninhabitable. How are they surviving in areas we've already secured?" The answer was that humans had something the Nexari had never encountered before, the ability to adapt on the fly. Where the Alliance forces followed military doctrine and established procedures, the humans made up new tactics every few minutes. When Nexari forces secured a tunnel junction, humans would pop up from maintenance shafts they didn't know existed. When the aliens cleared a storage room, humans would attack from ventilation systems too small for Nexari bodies to follow. When sophisticated Nexari equipment failed to detect human positions, it was because humans were hiding behind piles of ordinary mining debris that didn't register as military assets. Lieutenant Hyun's voice came over the communication system, calm and professional despite the chaos around her. "Command, the Nexari forces don't adapt well to changing conditions. They're following a rigid assault pattern that assumes their enemies will behave predictably." She was leading her squad through a series of connected chambers using mining carts and industrial equipment as mobile cover. Every few minutes, they would change position, attack from a new angle, then disappear back into the maze of tunnels and service corridors. "They expect us to defend fixed positions and follow standard military protocol," she continued. "When we don't, their entire tactical system breaks down." Park Jae's squad had turned their cargo bay into a killing field using nothing but mining explosives and metal debris. As Nexari warriors advanced expecting organized resistance, they found chaos instead. Explosions came from unexpected directions. Attacks came from positions that shouldn't have been defensible. Worst of all, the humans seemed to be everywhere. At once, the Nexari had conquered 17 star systems by being bigger, stronger, and more technologically advanced than their enemies. But they'd never fought an enemy that was smaller, weaker, and completely unpredictable. Private Kim So's explosives finally detonated aboard the crashed Nexari ships, sending secondary explosions rippling through the landing area. The aliens' own advanced technology became a weapon against them, as power cores overloaded and ammunition stockpiles cooked off. For the first time in their military history, the Nexari were discovering what it felt like to be afraid. These humans fought like cornered animals, and somehow impossibly they were winning. The news spread through the Nexari fleet like wildfire. In the mess halls of their great warships, veteran soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds spoke in hushed whispers about the mad apes of Sector 7. Communications officers shared confused reports from their fallen comrades. Medical personnel treated wounded warriors who spoke of enemies that appeared from nowhere and disappeared like ghosts. "They don't fight like civilized beings," reported Commander Vexcol to War Master Thexisol. His usually pristine armor was scorched and dented, and one of his forearms hung useless at his side. "They scream and howl during battle like wild beasts. Some of my troops, they're refusing to enter human-controlled areas." Thexisol studied the tactical reports with growing frustration. What should have been a 10-minute operation to secure a worthless mining platform had now stretched into 6 hours of brutal fighting. Worse, his casualty reports showed numbers that didn't make sense. How could 60 primitive soldiers inflict such damage on his elite forces? "Describe their tactics," Thexisol demanded. Vexcol's mandibles clicked nervously. "There are no tactics, War Master. They fight without pattern, without logic. When we corner them in one location, they attack from 3 others. When we destroy their positions, they simply move to new ones, and the sounds they make—" He shuddered. "They yell and chant words we don't understand. It's disturbing." What Vexicol didn't understand was that those wild howls were actually carefully coordinated signals. Park Jae had developed a system of war cries that communicated tactical information across the chaotic battlefield. A long howl meant enemy, approaching from the north tunnel. A series of sharp barks indicated prepare for explosive trap activation. The seemingly primitive screaming was actually more effective than traditional radio communication because the Nexari couldn't decode or jam it. In the depths of the asteroid, Lieutenant Hyun was putting the finishing touches on what she privately called psychological operations. She'd learned that Nexari had excellent night vision, but relied heavily on their advanced sensors for tactical awareness, so she'd created scenarios designed to mess with both. "Kim, so, are the holographic projectors in position?" she asked over the radio. "Affirmative," came the reply from somewhere deep in the mining tunnels. "Salvaged them from the recreational areas. They're programmed to project human silhouettes at random intervals." The plan was beautifully simple. Using basic holographic technology, meant for entertainment, they created the illusion of human soldiers appearing and disappearing throughout the tunnel system. Nexari forces would see movement, investigate, and find nothing. After hours of chasing, ghosts, even veteran warriors, began to doubt their own senses. But the real psychological breakthrough came when Private Lee Sun made a disturbing discovery about Nexari biology. While studying captured equipment, she noticed that their advanced hearing could detect frequencies far beyond human range. This gave her a terrible idea. "Captain Min," she reported, "I've been experimenting with the mining equipment's ultrasonic cleaners. If I modify the frequency generators, I can create sounds that will be extremely uncomfortable for Nexari troops, but completely inaudible to us." Within an hour, the humans had weaponized industrial cleaning equipment. High-frequency sound waves filled the tunnels, creating sensations that Nexari described as claws scraping inside our skulls. The aliens could hear the torture, but couldn't locate its source because human ears couldn't detect it at all. The combined effect was devastating to Nexari morale. They faced an enemy they couldn't predict in an environment filled with invisible torment, fighting opponents who seemed to appear and vanish at will, while making terrifying noises that chilled them to their cores. Admiral Vextar, monitoring the battle from the Alliance Command Center, watched the tactical display with growing amazement. The red dots representing Nexari forces kept moving into Sector 7, but they weren't achieving their objectives. Worse for the enemy, they were taking casualties at an unprecedented rate. "How are the humans doing this?" he asked Commander Kyle. "Our best military analysts have been studying Nexari tactics for months. These humans have been fighting them for 6 hours, and they're winning." Kyle studied the sensor readings carefully. "Look at this pattern," he said, pointing to the display. "Every time the Nexari think they've won a position, the humans turn it into a trap. They're not trying to hold ground, they're trying to bleed the enemy." It was true. Captain Min had abandoned traditional defensive strategy entirely. Instead of protecting fixed positions, his forces treated the entire asteroid as a weapon. When Nexari troops secured a tunnel, humans would seal it off and flood it with toxic mining gases. When aliens occupied a storage chamber, humans would trigger controlled cave-ins that buried them alive. Every victory the Nexari achieved cost them more troops than they could afford to lose. Sergeant Park J's voice crackled over the communication system from deep within the mining complex. "Captain, they're sending in their heavy assault troops. Now, the big ones with the enhanced armor." Min smiled grimly. They'd been waiting for this. "Execute Protocol Rabbit." Protocol Rabbit was perhaps the most psychologically devastating tactic the humans had developed. They would allow Nexari heavy troops to advance deep into the tunnel system, then collapse multiple passages simultaneously. The massive aliens would find themselves trapped in spaces too small for their bulky armor, unable to retreat or advance, slowly running out of air while human voices echoed through the darkness around them. But the humans weren't content with just tactical victories. They were waging war on the Nexari mind itself. Kim So had discovered that the aliens communicated through a combination of verbal language and electrical signals transmitted through their armor. By jamming these signals at random intervals, she created communication breakdowns that left Nexari units unable to coordinate with each other. "Unit 7, report your position," a Nexari commander would order. "Position unable to, coordinates unclear," would come the fragmented reply as human-generated interference scrambled their communications. The effect was like fighting while blindfolded and deaf. Nexari troops began to doubt their equipment, their commanders, and eventually themselves. Lieutenant Hyun had taken psychological warfare even further. She'd programmed the mining facility's automated systems to play recordings of human laughter at random intervals throughout the complex. Nexari forces would hear the sound echoing through the tunnels but could never locate its source. The laughter seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, suggesting that humans were watching their every move. Private Lee Sun's frequency weapons had evolved as well. She discovered that certain sound combinations could trigger involuntary responses in Nexari physiology, muscle spasms, disorientation, even temporary paralysis. What had started as industrial noise had become a sophisticated torture device. The breaking point came when a full company of Nexari elite troops simply refused to enter the asteroid. These were veterans who had fought across 17 star systems, but they stood at the entrance to the mining tunnels and would not advance. "The humans are inside our heads," one soldier reported to his commander. "They know what we're thinking before we think it. They're not soldiers, they're demons." Thexisol realized he was facing something unprecedented in Nexari military history. A complete breakdown of unit discipline based not on superior firepower, but on fear. His troops were being defeated by an enemy that had turned psychological warfare into an art form. What made it worse was that human tactics seemed to evolve every few minutes. Just when Nexari forces adapted to one technique, the humans would deploy something completely different. They fought with the creativity of desperation and the cunning of predators who had turned their own weakness into strength. The humans weren't just winning individual battles, they were teaching the entire Nexari Empire what it felt like to be afraid. And for a species that had built their reputation on being the galaxy's most feared warriors, fear was a weapon more devastating than any plasma cannon. Word of the mad apes spread beyond Sector 7 to every Nexari ship in the fleet. These humans didn't just fight like cornered animals, they fought like cornered animals that had learned to use their enemy's own psychology against them. The Nexari Empire had never tasted defeat. For over 3 centuries, their massive fleets had swept across the galaxy like an unstoppable storm. Entire civilizations had surrendered at the mere sight of their black warships appearing in their skies. Their military doctrine was simple and brutal, overwhelming force applied without mercy until the enemy had no choice but to submit. Warmaster Thexisol had personally commanded victories against 47 different species. He understood warfare, like a master craftsman understood his tools. Every battle followed predictable patterns. First came the psychological warfare, demonstrations of superior firepower that broke enemy morale. Then came the systematic destruction of military assets. Finally, the survivors would beg for terms, but as he stared at the data flowing across his command screen, nothing made sense anymore. The numbers seemed impossible, like some kind of computer error that his technicians hadn't caught. His elite, 3rd Battle Group had engaged 60 human defenders in what should have been a routine cleanup operation. These weren't even proper soldiers. The intelligence reports described them as miners, mechanics, and maintenance workers who happened to be armed. The casualty reports kept updating, each new number more shocking than the last. 1,873 Nexari warriors dead, 12 ships either destroyed or too damaged to continue fighting, an entire assault division wiped out by improvised explosives that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their armor. 3 of his most experienced commanders were requesting immediate medical evacuation for what their reports described as psychological trauma. Thexizol's second-in-command approached cautiously. The Warmaster's reputation for violence when receiving bad news was well known throughout the fleet. "Sir, the 7th Squadron is reporting that the humans have somehow turned their own damaged ships into weapons. They're ramming our vessels and detonating their power cores on impact." The Warmaster's 4 eyes narrowed as he processed this information. Ramming attacks were considered the tactic of desperate primitives, something civilized species had abandoned millennia ago. But these humans weren't just ramming randomly. They were calculating the exact moments when their sacrifice would cause maximum damage to multiple Nexari ships at once. "What about psychological warfare protocols?" Thexisol demanded. "Have we made them understand the futility of resistance?" His aide checked another report, confusion clear in his voice. "Sir, our psychological warfare specialists say the humans appear to be enjoying themselves. Several were observed laughing while under heavy fire. One group started singing what our translators believe was some kind of traditional war song." Thexisol felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine uncertainty. The humans weren't following any recognizable pattern of behavior. They should have been terrified, desperate, looking for any way to surrender with honor. Instead, they seemed to be treating the entire battle like some kind of elaborate game. Another update appeared on his screen. A single human soldier had somehow infiltrated the supply depot on Nexari Ship 7 and contaminated their water recycling system with something that made the entire crew violently ill. The same human had then apparently left a handwritten note in broken Nexari script that roughly translated to, "Hope you feel better soon. Try some soup." Admiral Vextar was monitoring the battle from Alliance Command when the impossible happened. The Nexari withdrawal signal began broadcasting across all frequencies. She had to run the translation program 3 times before she could believe what she was hearing. The most feared military force in the galaxy was retreating from a battle against 60 humans. The Alliance had been fighting the Nexari for 8 years. They had lost 17 colonies, hundreds of ships, and millions of lives. Their best strategists had developed elaborate plans involving coordinated attacks by thousands of vessels. None of it had worked. The Nexari seemed to have an answer for every conventional military tactic, but somehow, a small group of humans who barely understood how their own weapons worked had accomplished what the entire Alliance military couldn't do. They had made the Nexari afraid. Captain Min stood among the wreckage of what used to be Sector 7's main corridor. The metal walls were twisted and blackened from explosions. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows across debris that included pieces of both human and Nexari equipment. Of his original 60-person crew, only 17 were still standing, and most of those were wounded. Lieutenant Hyun moved between the injured, using medical supplies they had scavenged from 3 different species during the battle. She was treating a Nexari prisoner with the same care she gave to her own people, something that seemed to confuse the alien warrior completely. Private Kim. So looked up from her makeshift sensor station, excitement breaking through her exhaustion. "Captain, long-range sensors are picking up massive movement. The entire Nexari fleet is pulling back from Alliance space. They're not just retreating from us, they're leaving the whole sector." The communications array crackled to life with Commander Kyle's voice from Alliance headquarters. "Human forces, we're seeing the impossible here. The Nexari Empire is withdrawing from positions they've held for years. How did you accomplish what our entire military couldn't do?" Min looked around at his exhausted team. They were covered in dust and blood, their equipment held together with improvised repairs and sheer determination. Most of them had never been in a real fight before this battle. They had won through pure stubbornness and a complete refusal to accept that defeat was inevitable. "We didn't have a choice," Min replied simply, "so we decided to make our own rules." Across the galaxy, news of the human victory spread faster than light-speed communications. The species that had dominated through fear and overwhelming force had been stopped by a handful of miners who refused to quit. Other civilizations began asking themselves a troubling question. If humans could do this with improvised weapons and no formal training, what would they be capable of with proper equipment and support? The Nexari Empire would spend years trying to understand what had happened in that small sector of space. Their greatest military minds would analyze every moment of the battle, searching for some logical explanation for their defeat. But they would never truly understand the simple truth. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who doesn't know they're supposed to lose.